Hello and welcome back to Wiki's Worst Albums, where I listen to albums that Wikipedia claims are some of the worst ever because I'm a moron. The next album I'll be talking about is by Attila. No, not that Attila. That's a metalcore band that seemed to be doing pretty well. No, this is about the original Attila, formed in 1969, broke up in 1970, and their only release was a self-titled album. And here's the story of that album. If I were to literally judge this album by its cover, then I could see why it might be on some worst album ever lists. Get it? They're called Attila, and they're dressed as Huns. Attila the Hun. Genius. The Meat Locker, on the other hand, fuck knows what that's about. Now, if we take a closer look at the fine gentleman from Attila here, does the one on the right look familiar to you? If he does, then that's because that is the Piano Man himself. Yes, it's a young Billy Joel. Even one of America's most successful singer-songwriters isn't safe from Wikipedia's list of music considered the worst. He would of course go on to make his mark with songs that brought some massive pop hooks and also often doubled as some rich storytelling. But as a 20-year-old, all that Joel was interested in was kicking some ass. Or more accurately, kicking faces in, because that was actually one of their lyrics. Kick your faces in! Attila was a psychedelic early heavy metal duo consisting of Joel and drummer John Small. The thing is, Joel's primary instrument has always been some variant of a piano. He's never been able to play guitar. How do you play heavy metal without a guitar? Well, it wasn't a completely stupid idea. After all, John Lord's organ playing was a big driving force in the sound of Deep Purple. So Joel followed Lord's lead by playing an amplified organ, which resulted in some nasty, distorted tones. Meanwhile, Ray Manzarek of The Doors was a famous example of a keyboardist playing bass notes to compensate for not having a bass guitarist. So that was Joel's style of playing in Attila, basically. Root notes with the left hand and jamming with the right. And since it was an organ he was probably playing bass notes with foot pedals as well. And Joel also appeared to compensate for a lack of guitars by turning his organ up really fucking loud. Imagine how flooring it would have been in 1970 to hear Black Sabbath for the first time. Even if the overall volume wasn't that loud, it probably still would have felt that way because you'd heard nothing else like it. Well, Attila weren't just playing at a volume that people weren't used to yet. They literally had people running out of the venue in fear with blood coming out of their ears. Guess that's why they were called a metal band. That sort of audience reception ensured that Attila wouldn't last very long. The fact that Joel ran off with John Small's wife wouldn't have helped either. Taking my dick in my pants. But shortly after that, Small would basically save his life. The wife, Elizabeth, severed ties with both Billy and John, which led to Joel overdosing on pills before calling John to apologize. And John was the one who went to find him and subsequently got him medical attention. So I guess there's no real hard feelings between them, especially since Joel would stay married to Elizabeth for nearly 10 years, and Small later helped him out as a video producer on some of his live DVD releases. Bands like this are usually much better received over time once the critics get over the initial shock the band created. But not Attila, apparently. The main editor of the online music guide AllMusic called the album undoubtedly the worst album released in the history of recorded music itself. And Joel himself has dismissed the album as psychedelic bullshit. It's probably important to note that the scathing AllMusic review of Attila is written by the same guy that wrote the reviews for the rest of Billy Joel's discography, and he was way kinder on most of those albums. And there lies the main reason why Attila has become so infamous. Fans of Billy Joel's slick pop rock that find out about this album will be greatly disappointed or even disgusted. And it probably goes the other way. If you do manage to find some enjoyment from Attila, then you're probably not the type who would jam along to stuff like Uptown Girl or Only the Good Die Young. And that includes myself. That's alright, we've got another album on this supposed list of the worst albums ever that's really not bad at all. Are you crazy? Are you out of your... Yes. Firstly, those distorted organ tones, they're just sick. If I didn't know the story of the album, I surely would have assumed that there was some guitar in there, but nope, that was just organ played through a wah pedal. So Joel doesn't do too badly at driving the songs with just an organ, without everything sounding empty. Plus, he shreds the hell out of those keys. How can you listen to the soloing in a song like California Flash and not be at least mildly impressed? On the other hand, there are times where it does sound like he's noodling on a cheap church organ, so it gets a bit too cheesy and funky sometimes, and maybe a couple of times he kind of fumbles in his playing. So those do take away a bit from the supposed power of Attila. Speaking of cheesy, Billy Joel's singing on this album is pretty over the top. That's probably my biggest problem with Attila. The guy could always sing well, but he just tries way too hard here, trying to wail like Robert Plant, but he just comes off as goofy most of the time. And while his eventual superstardom would have partly stemmed from an ear for memorable vocal melodies, you'd probably never guess that from hearing Attila. John Small's a good drummer though, so no complaints about his playing. So Attila's status of having one of the worst albums ever is a bit similar to that of the first album I looked at, Lord Such and Heavy Friends, in that it's probably a little derivative. I mean, I'm not very familiar with organ-driven early heavy metal bands, but I imagine that Billy Joel was influenced by a bunch of them, whoever they were. But Attila are also saddled with expectations from Billy Joel fans who no doubt prefer much more straightforward music. And that's the main reason why the idea of Attila being the worst album of all time is probably bullshit overreacting. You know what, I should probably change my rating of Lord Such and Friends at the end of the last video, because I realise now that Attila probably better represents a 1 on the scale of bad albums from best to worst. So I'm gonna bump Lord Such up to 2. Not that it's a terrible album, but it has more against it than Attila does. So congratulations Billy and John for getting the first true 1 out of 10 in my series. Were Attila a bit derivative? Probably. Is it a bit ham-fisted? Yeah. Joel sure was better off leaving this style of music behind. It wasn't his real strength. But it's fun, so shut up. Amplifier Fire Part 2 March of the Huns fucking slaps, and you can't tell me otherwise. Anyway, if you go to the full album on YouTube, most of the comments are defending it, and with the only examples cited being a disgruntled fan of the solo work the album is tied to,
I don't like change!
And the artist himself, whose tastes clearly shifted away from this stuff, I'd say this is more of a mistake from whoever edited this Wikipedia page than a mistake from the people who rag on it. Anyway, Billy, it turns out some of us actually like psychedelic bullshit, so yeah, fuck you. So that continues this great start to my Wiki's Worst Album series, with 2 albums that aren't even that bad. Maybe the next episode will be the breakthrough. I'll tell you right now, it's based around Elvis. Bloody Elvis. Surely that's gonna be a stinker, right? Surely. But thanks for watching, take care, and goodbye.